You rarely see public comments like this from a sitting U.S. district judge, but Reggie Walton is voicing serious concern about the verbal attacks against judges in cases involving Donald Trump. It comes after Trump again went after the judge in the New York hush money trial, as well as his daughter, calling her a rabid Trump hater based on a social media account that, as it turns out, isn't hers at all. It's a situation Judge Walton warns is dangerous, and it's one he knows all too well because he has been a target himself.
Yes, threatened me one day, and then the next day called and made a threat against my daughter, and also had indicated my address. So they obviously had done some research to find out that I had a daughter and what her name was. It's very disconcerting to have someone making comments about a judge, and it's particularly problematic when those comments are in the form of a threat.
I want to bring in NBC News Justice reporter Ryan Riley. Also with us, MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin. So, Lisa, we don't often hear judges wading into things that can be considered, politically charged. But what does this tell you about the moment we're in right now?
Chris, I want to underscore the first part of your question as an affirmation. Federal judges, by nature, are allergic to the press. They see us, and many of them run away. And so to have seen Reggie Walton give a television interview last night was absolutely extraordinary and stunning. I know a number of federal judges, and I will tell you that on background, I spoke to at least two this morning who confirmed for me that seeing a colleague on the federal bench was, in fact, highly unusual. And one even expressed her gratitude to him for speaking up as a senior member of the judiciary, perhaps nearing the end of his career. That said, this is a break glass moment akin to seeing Judge Michael Luttig testify before the January 6th committee, where he said that he thought Donald Trump was a clear and present danger to the future of our democracy. To see Judge Walton, himself a sitting federal judge, not a retired federal judge like Judge Luttig, call attention to the threat environment that federal judges are under was breathtaking.
And Ryan, you've covered this judge before, Reggie Walton. He's had a lot of January 6th defendants in his courtroom. He says the amount of threats he's received has escalated ever since. What more can you tell us about him and, in fact, the threat to judges all around the country, particularly in Trump-related cases?
Yeah, I think Judge Walton, like a lot of judges in the D.C. federal courthouse, has been sort of flabbergasted that so many Americans who maybe had a law-abiding life before January 6th actually believe Donald Trump's lies about the election. Because, judges really love facts, right? Like, that's something that they're very big on. Like, here's the facts and here's what actually happened. And to see so many people just fall for sort of absurd lies that have no basis in logic or reason is really something that I think just confounds and confuses them. And that's something that they speak out about in court. But of course, those comments that they make in these court cases, especially, in these misdemeanor cases that are just making their way through the courthouse every day, aren't gathering the type of attention that you would get from going on, CNN or a national news program. So it is something I think that, that will get a much broader audience for it. But a lot of these judges have been issuing some of these warnings about the threat to democracy and the threat to the country and just what a serious thing January 6th was. And we've seen it from cases that have ranged from those low-level misdemeanor cases all the way up to cases of seditious conspiracy or cases involving officers who were assaulted with, a stun gun being driven into their neck. Really horrific attacks on law enforcement that we saw as a result of all of these Trump supporters believing these sort of ridiculous lies about the 2020 election. I
think it's also worth saying, Lisa, that Judge Walton was nominated to the bench twice by two Republican presidents. But let me move on to Juan Merchan, because he's been targeted this week. His daughter's been targeted this week because his limited gag order doesn't cover him or any members of his family. Do you see that changing and imminently? Because especially when it involves a family member, that's not what they signed up for.
It's certainly not what the family members signed up for. And Judge Merchan's daughter, as I understand it, is certainly not a minor. She's an adult woman living her own life and hopefully on her own terms. This was not of her choice. That having been said, and I know that this will be head scratching for you and a number of our viewers, when you speak to judges about the risks to them, many of them will say this goes with the job. It is not our job to protect ourselves and cloak ourselves essentially in the judicial mantle of our orders, whether or not they're on the federal bench and have lifetime tenure, or our state elected judges, as Juan Merchan and Arthur Engoron, who presided over the New York Attorney General's civil fraud case, are. Many of them don't see it as proper to include themselves within the ambit of a gag order. That's in part because as judges, they also have different levels of security details. But Chris, as you also know, there have been a number of tragedies involving judges and their families, most famously the case of Judge Esther Salas in the District of New Jersey. She's a federal judge whose son was murdered. But before Judge Salas as well, there was a judge in New York, a federal judge who was murdered in the late 80s in his backyard by the father of a disgruntled litigant. Judge Joan Lefkow, who is a federal district judge in Chicago, came home one afternoon in 2005 to find her husband and her mother murdered by a litigant whose case she has dismissed. There is a long history of threats against federal judges and state judges, but even more importantly, of maybe threats that never materialize, that just come to violent end without any warning.
Yeah, there's also the question of whether or not this could impact the way a judge handles the courtroom, rules in a courtroom. I want to play a little bit more of what Judge Walton said about that last night and the threat environment.
You can't let that impact on how you live your life and how you treat litigants who are before you, because even though threats may be made against you and against your family, you still have an obligation to ensure that everybody who comes into your courtroom is treated fairly, regardless of who they are or what they've done.
And to your point, Lisa, look, criminals, mobsters threatening judges is not something new, unfortunately, but the breadth of the threats now, which Ryan has reported so extensively on, is that something we should reasonably, Lisa, expect judges to accept as part of the job?
I think, Chris, there are a number of disincentives for people to accept jobs as judges these days. The money is part of that. It is increasingly difficult to find people who are at the top of their game in the legal market who want to accept the salary of a federal judge. There have been complaints for decades from those in the federal judiciary basically saying they need cost of living increases just to be able to live in some of the urban areas in which they are practicing judges. That having been said, do we need to expect people to expect this? No. This is not normal. This should not be normal. It is weighing on me that one of Judge Walton's motivations for speaking out last night may not just be the cases that he's seen before him and the threats to him, but the fact that his colleague, Judge Tanya Chutkan, on the federal district bench in D.C., has herself been a victim of threats, so much so that someone is currently being prosecuted for the things that they have said on her voicemail and the communications that they have sent to her chambers. That's an environment in which no judge, state, federal, lifetime tenure, or elected should have to live within.
Lisa Rubin and Ryan Riley, thank you for a very important conversation.
Hey everyone, MSNBC has a new and improved app. You'll get real-time alerts and analysis, live blogs, in-depth essays, video highlights, and the best 2024 election coverage. Download the new MSNBC app. Here's how to do it. You tap on the App Store on your phone. You hit search on the bottom right corner. You type in MSNBC. You click on the MSNBC app. You click on Get or the cloud icon and enjoy it.